begin the story.
They said most people die peacefully in their sleep, but they didn't tell you how many souls have been swallowed whole by the silence of their own bedrooms. They didn't tell you how many warriors have died not on a battlefield, not in an accident, but right there beneath soft blankets in homes full of noise while fighting wars that no one could see. I know because I almost became one of them. My name is Elijah Domingo, and I used to think that rest meant sleep, that the bed was a place of comfort, not combat. But let me ask you something that might shake you deeper than you expect. What if your bed, the very thing you run to for peace, has become your greatest battlefield? What if the reason you can't get up isn't because you're weak, but because you've been under spiritual attack, and the war has been waging while everyone else just keeps scrolling? I remember the day it started. I was in my apartment in Quezon City. It was a normal Tuesday. I had just come home from a 36-hour shift at the hospital. I threw my bag down, pulled off my scrubs, and collapsed onto the mattress. No prayers, no dinner, just exhaustion. But that night, something shifted. I didn't just fall asleep. I fell into a silence so loud it rang in my ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't cry. All I could do was lay there feeling the weight of something I couldn't name. My phone buzzed. The world moved on. But my body, it refused. They thought I was resting. But my soul was suffocating. I wish someone had told me the truth, that when your spirit is under siege, even rest can feel like death. That when you've been fighting too long with no backup, the most dangerous place isn't outside your house, it's under your own roof, on your own bed. That night I didn't hear screams, I heard whispers. Whispers that sounded like my own voice. You're not enough. You're a burden. You failed God. You should disappear. I wanted to fight them. I wanted to rebuke them. I knew the verses. I knew the songs. But the truth. They felt real. They didn't come like demons in horror movies. They came like memories, like logic, like shame dressed in a familiar voice. And I couldn't tell anyone. Because how do you explain to someone that your bed has become a graveyard for your joy? That every time you close your eyes, something tries to convince you not to wake up? I didn't need louder sermons. I didn't need another motivational quote. I needed rescue. And that rescue didn't come with thunder. It came with a whisper louder than death itself. My child, this isn't where your story ends. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't audible. No one else heard it. But in the middle of that dark room, something sacred entered. And it didn't scream at me to rise. It didn't shame me for lying down. It simply sat next to me. I have seen your silent wars. I have counted every tear you hid from the world. I remember sobbing, not because I was scared, but because someone finally saw me. The real me. Not Elijah the nurse, not Elijah the kuya, not Elijah the prayer warrior. Just me, broken, exhausted, hollow. And I realized something. Maybe your bed is not just for rest. Maybe it's also an altar, a place where God doesn't wait for you to perform but chooses to meet you in your unraveling. I am not waiting for you to be strong. I am here because you are mine. That was the moment everything changed. Not because my problems disappeared, but because I saw what I'd been blind to, that hell trembles not when you shout, but when you breathe again after wanting to give up. That heaven draws near, not when you're on your feet, but when you whisper, God, I'm still here, with your last ounce of strength. So let me ask you again, is your bed just a bed? Or has it become a war zone where demons whisper, hope flickers, and angels hold their breath, waiting to see if you'll rise one more time? Because if it is, you're not alone. And what you're about to hear next may just be the battle cry your soul has been waiting for. I used to think I was just tired. You know, the normal kind of tired. The kind you fix with a nap, a cup of Baracco coffee, maybe a Sunday service, and a smile after worship. But it wasn't that. It wasn't just exhaustion from my shift, or from my family's needs, or the noise of Manila traffic. It was something deeper, something soul deep, something I didn't even have words for. I would show up to work at the hospital with my badge on my stethoscope around my neck, smiling at patients and telling them they'd be okay. When deep inside, I wasn't even sure if I would make it to the next morning. I didn't know I was already gurgling under the surface. I didn't know the cracks were growing wider. Each day, I said I'm fine without meaning it. And you know what made it worse? People praised me for it. They called me strong, resilient, selfless. Tiwala lang Elijah, kaya mo yan, you're our rock. I was everybody's rock, but no one saw that I was crumbling. Because in Filipino culture, we are taught to hide it, to keep the family together, to always be the kuya who doesn't break, to give, to serve, to pray, to smile even when we're bleeding behind our smiles. So I kept moving, kept smiling, kept posting Bible verses, kept saying amen even when my spirit was too dry to hear heaven. But at night, that's when the mask fell off. That's when I would curl into myself on the mattress and whisper, Lord, is there anyone left to carry me? Silence. Then more silence. That's how the fall started, not all at once like a crash, but slowly, invisibly, like sand slipping through fingers. Until one day, I didn't want to get up. Not because I was lazy, but because standing felt like dragging an entire world on my back. I started canceling hangouts, ignoring messages, muting my group chats. I'd stare at the ceiling in the dark and wonder why I didn't feel anything anymore. Not joy, not anger, not even fear. Just numbness. Total soul-level numbness. And still, I kept serving. I helped my Lola with her meds, paid my younger brother's tuition, led prayer during our Sunday live stream. No one noticed, no one asked. But I started wondering, is this what it means to be chosen, to always carry, but never be carried to always pour, but never be filled to always pray, but never be prayed for? Then one night, when I was too tired to even cry, I felt a presence enter my room. Not loud, not dramatic, but like a breath I forgot I needed. And I heard it again.
You have been carrying too much for too long. I never asked you to prove your worth through performance.
I wanted to argue. I wanted to say, but Lord, they need me. If I stop, who will stand? But, he whispered again.
Who carries you when you collapse?
That broke me. I had never let myself ask that, because I thought weakness would disqualify me. I thought rest was for the lesser. I thought burning out meant I had failed God. But in that stillness, he showed me something else.
Your fatigue is not failure. It is a signal, a sign that you've been waging war without restraint. And even soldiers need to sleep.
I laid there stunned. For once, I wasn't praying out of obligation. I was just breathing, just being, just existing, without having to do anything holy or spiritual. And even in that moment,
you were still mine,
he said. That night, I didn't rise with strength, but I rose with honesty. For the first time, I said the truth out loud. I am not okay. And that's okay. It was the most sacred confession I'd ever made. And I believe some of you watching this right now, you've been carrying more than your soul was designed to hold alone. You've smiled too long, served too long, faked being okay for too many people who never asked how you were really doing. So hear me, Kapatid. If you're still breathing, if you're still here, if your eyes open this morning, even with a sigh, that is not weakness. That is proof. Proof that even in your unraveling, you are still chosen, still loved, still seen. Even when no one else claps, heaven sees your silent survival. And in the next part of this journey, I'll tell you what happened the night my bed became hell itself, and how the enemy nearly convinced me that I had no reason left to live. But before that, just remember this.
I never asked you to be perfect. I just asked you to let me carry what you couldn't.
It was supposed to be just a bed, a simple mattress, a few pillows, a blanket my mother gave me before she passed. It was the one place in the world where I thought I could finally rest, let go, breathe. But over time, that bed became something else entirely. A trap, a prison, a battleground that didn't smell of blood or smoke, but of stillness, suffocating stillness. You see, the enemy doesn't always come in chaos. Sometimes he comes in silence. He doesn't always scream. Sometimes he whispers. And for me, he whispered the loudest when the world finally went quiet. 3 a.m., that's when the war would begin, everyone else asleep. Even the city would hush. But in my little room in Quezon City, the demons had learned my schedule. They knew when I'd be vulnerable. They didn't knock. They just came and sat at the edge of the bed where hope used to live. They didn't shout, "You're worthless." They whispered, "You're falling behind. You're too late. No one is coming." God stopped listening. I knew those weren't my thoughts, not really. But they sounded so much like me. It was hard to tell. That's how the enemy works. He doesn't barge in. He impersonates your voice. He learns your tone. He uses your memories. He takes your trauma and turns it into a script you start repeating to yourself until you're convinced it's truth. That's when my bed stopped being a place of sleep. It became my hell. I couldn't explain it to anyone. How do you tell your friends that the softest place in your apartment feels like a graveyard, that the moment you lay down, you start suffocating under the weight of invisible chains? I'd close my eyes and feel a pressure on my chest, like something unseen was sitting on it. My lungs would tighten, my hands would go cold. I'd hear nothing but feel everything, and every time I tried to rise, it got worse. I'd lie there paralyzed, not because I was weak, but because something spiritual was happening, and I had no language for it. They say rest is a gift, but when the enemy knows you're a threat, even your rest becomes his target. And that's what happened to me. Rest became torment. Stillness became sabotage. I thought I was losing my mind. Until one night, the darkness whispered something new. "Why don't you just sleep forever?" That's when I knew. This wasn't just depression. This was warfare, not against my body, but against my purpose. The enemy didn't want to kill me. He wanted me to quit, to surrender, to fade away quietly so no one would notice the mantle I carried, the anointing I hadn't even fully walked into yet. But just when I felt the cold creeping in, just when I thought I'd let go, I felt something warmer than any blanket. A presence. Soft, steady, familiar. It wasn't loud. It didn't chase the shadows with force. It just entered.
You are not fighting alone.
I opened my eyes. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was there. I felt him sitting at the edge of my bed, the same spot where the whispers used to be. But this time, there was no voice of accusation, only comfort.
I am right here, even when you cannot feel me.
My tears came without permission. No begging, no rehearsed prayer. Just a broken whisper, "Jesus, please don't leave." And he didn't.
I never left.
That's the thing about him. He doesn't walk out when the darkness gets thick. He walks in. He sits in silence with you, not because he's powerless, but because his presence is power. He doesn't need lightning to heal you. Sometimes he just stays.
I have seen your battles in the dark. I have heard your silent screams, and I call this bed not a prison, but an altar.
That night, the whispers stopped. Not forever, but long enough for me to breathe again. Long enough to remember that I'm not abandoned. That spiritual battles may begin in silence, but they end in surrender. Not surrender to the enemy, surrender to the one who already won. So if your bed has become a place of torment, if every time you try to rest, the whispers return, if sleep feels like death, and you don't know how to rise again, remember this.
What the enemy used to break you, I will use to build you. The night may whisper fear, but I speak life.
And the next time the darkness comes, you'll remember who else is sitting on the edge of your bed. Not a demon, not depression, but a king who refuses to walk away. I had mastered the art of functioning while falling apart. I could refill prescriptions for patients, give advice to cousins on Facebook, even lead opening prayer for Sunday's live stream. All while something inside me was slowly, quietly dying. And no one knew, not even me at first. I thought it was just a season, just a dip, just stress from being an OFW for too long, and finally coming home to a country that never feels like rest. But days turned into weeks, and the heaviness didn't leave. It settled, like a fog in my chest, like silence in my spirit. There was no loud breakdown, no visible signs, just emptiness. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad. I was all nothing. And that's what scared me most. I didn't even have the energy to fake it anymore. No more inspirational Instagram captions. No more kaya pa to Lord. No more pretending that worship songs still hit me like they used to. I'd show up to church, but feel disconnected. I'd read the Bible, but the words felt dry. I'd pray, but it was like shouting into a canyon that never echoed back. It felt like everyone was hearing from God, except me. That's when the enemy started twisting the knife. God's done with you. You're not chosen. You've failed too many times. You're faking it. And the scary part, a part of me believed it, because how could I be called and feel this hollow? How could I be anointed and feel this dry? How could I be saved and still want to disappear? I didn't tell anyone. How could I? In our culture, silence is strength. We don't talk about depression. We rebuke it. We don't talk about exhaustion. We blame it on lack of prayer. We don't talk about spiritual emptiness. We say, you just need more faith. But what if faith is exactly what I was holding on to? What if the reason I didn't walk away was because deep down under all the silence I still believed he was there? I just couldn't feel him. And I was ashamed to admit it. Until one night, I broke. I didn't even cry. I just laid there flat on my back, staring at the ceiling, whispering, God, am I still yours? And then I heard him, not in thunder, not in fire, but in stillness.
I never left Elijah. I have been sitting in this silence with you.
I turned my face into the pillow and wept, finally. Not because I was afraid, but because I had been seen, fully seen, even in my emptiness.
Your hollowness doesn't scare me. Your silence doesn't disqualify you. I am not looking for noise. I am looking for honesty.
I whispered again, but Lord, I have nothing left. And he responded,
Then give me that.
That moment wrecked me, because for the first time I realized God wasn't asking me for strength. He was asking me for surrender. Not fake joy, not forced prayers, just the truth.
I am not drawn to perfection. I am drawn to what is real.
And what was real? I was empty. But even my emptiness had value in his hands. That night, something shifted. Not instantly, not like fireworks, but like a gentle crack of light under a closed door. Enough to remind me, I wasn't abandoned. I was just tired. Tired from being strong for too long. Tired of pretending I wasn't breaking. Tired of being the reliable one while bleeding behind closed doors. But he knew, and he stayed. So, if you've been showing up for everyone else while quietly falling apart, if you've been strong in public but broken in private, if you've been smiling for others while screaming in silence, hear me when I say this. You are not forgotten. You are not failing. You are not alone.
I see you in the dark and I call you mine.
And in the next part, I'll tell you what happened when I finally let go, when I stopped performing, when I allowed myself to be held, and heaven answered in a way I never expected. Because sometimes, collapse is not the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of encounter. I didn't plan to let go. I didn't mean to fall that far. But one night, my body did what my soul had been too tired to do. It collapsed. The doctor said it was a mild stroke brought on by stress, dehydration, and exhaustion. I was rushed to the ER at St. Luke's. I remember the blinding lights, nurses shouting code words, my name being repeated over and over. Elijah. Elijah, can you hear me? I heard them, but I couldn't respond. I was slipping, not just physically, but somewhere deeper. And that's when everything faded. No sound, no monitors, no pain, just stillness. Then light, but not hospital light, not fluorescent white or sterile blue. This was different. This light, it didn't shine on me. It passed through me. It knew me. And in the midst of that golden living light, I saw him, standing, still. Beautiful beyond human description. He didn't wear a crown. He wasn't glowing like paintings. But I knew it was him, Jesus. Not the version we print on calendars, but the real one, eyes full of eternity, voice full of mercy, presence full of power, so tender it made me weep before he even spoke. I tried to fall on my face, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in awe. And he stepped toward me, slowly, like he wasn't in a rush, no urgency, just understanding. When he spoke, I didn't hear the sound with my ears. I heard it in my bones.
Elijah, my child.
I burst into tears. Not because I was scared, but because the way he said my name, I hadn't heard it like that in years. Not with burden, not with pressure, but with love.
You have been carrying weights that were never yours.
I tried to respond. I wanted to explain, justify, say, I was just trying to help my family, to make you proud, to keep going. But before I could say a word,
I know I saw every night you cried into the pillow. I felt every moment you held back tears in front of others. I heard every silent prayer you whispered when no one else was listening.
I collapsed, not in shame, but in release. There before the Son of God, I no longer had to pretend. No more ministry persona. No more strong kuya mask. No more Sunday service smile. Just me, weak, broken, undone. And still, he didn't turn away.
I have never been disappointed in your honesty. It was never your strength that moved me. It was your surrender.
He stepped closer. I could see the scars on his hands, but they didn't bleed. They radiated something I can't explain, like every pain I'd ever felt had already been absorbed there.
I didn't choose you because you could handle the burden. I chose you because you were willing to love in a world that forgot how to.
And I broke. I wept. Snot tears shaking, the kind of crying you don't do in church, but in secret, when your soul finally exhales. I tried to speak again, but Lord, I'm so tired. And he smiled, not with pity, but with promise.
Then rest, Elijah. Not the world's rest, not the rest that still requires you to be useful. Rest in me. Rest in the truth that even when you do nothing, you are still loved.
I whispered. But what about my calling, my family, the people who need me? His answer melted me.
What if I told you I care about you more than what you do for me? What if I told you your worth was never in your work?
I stood there, undone. The one who created galaxies wasn't demanding my hustle. He was inviting my healing. He wasn't waiting for my performance. He was welcoming my presence. And then he reached out his hand, not to command, but to hold. I took it trembling, and when I did, it was like every chain I didn't even know I had shattered. Years of expectations, decades of religious pressure, generations of be the strong one, all of it gone. In his grip, I was just a son again, not a servant, not a soldier, just his.
You do not have to earn what I freely give. You do not have to die on a cross I already conquered. You only need to remember who you are and who I have always been.
He leaned in closer, and I felt it. Peace, real peace, not escape, not numbness, peace that held me like a blanket and breathed life into my ribs.
You are mine, Elijah, even in your collapse, even in your confusion, even in your silence. I am the God who stays.
And just like that, I woke up, not with fireworks, not with trumpets, just breath. Air filled my lungs. Monitors beeped again. Nurses were surprised. Doctors called it unexpected recovery. But I knew better. That wasn't just medicine. That was mercy. And the next time I closed my eyes, I whispered something simple, but sacred thank you, for meeting me in the silence. Because that bed, that wasn't my grave. It was my altar. After I came back from that moment, that encounter, everything around me looked the same room, same walls, same flickering ceiling fan above my bed. But something inside me had shifted. I didn't wake up feeling powerful. I didn't rise with a fresh anointing or a booming sermon in my chest. I woke up, sensitive, more than ever before. But this time, it didn't scare me. For most of my life, I thought being sensitive was a weakness, especially as a man, especially as a Filipino, especially in a culture that teaches us to toughen up. Hide your tears, don't take things too seriously. I was the one who always felt too much, the one who walked into rooms and picked up tension no one else noticed, the one who cried during worship when no one else did, the one who couldn't explain why I'd feel sudden heaviness even in the middle of laughter. I used to think it was emotional instability, or maybe I was just too dramatic, like they said. But after that encounter with Jesus, I saw it for what it truly was, a gift.
Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a frequency. It is how I speak to you through you and around you.
Suddenly, everything made sense. Why I'd lose sleep after certain conversations. Why some people drained me without even saying anything negative. Why silence sometimes screamed louder than noise. I wasn't imagining it. I was discerning it. I wasn't too emotional. I was spiritually wired. And that realization, it felt like a healing balm over years of shame. Because for too long, I had been told to numb it, tone it down, be less Elijah. But God, He made no apology for how I was designed.
You were built to feel what others ignore, to carry what others mock, to see what others deny.
That kind of wiring comes with weight, yes, but it also comes with responsibility. You see, when you're sensitive to the Spirit, you're also sensitive to suffering. You walk into a place and feel the spiritual climate before a single word is said. You sense danger before it shows up. You weep over souls you've never met. You feel the shift in the room before it erupts. That's not weakness. That's warfare awareness. And I believe some of you, watching this, know exactly what I'm talking about. You've walked into rooms that looked peaceful but felt like pressure. You've been around people who smiled at you, but your spirit screamed, "Be careful." You've had dreams that carried weight for nations you've never visited. You've cried in prayer for someone you barely know and didn't understand why. Let me say it clearly. You are not broken. You are not unstable. You are spiritually awake in a world that prefers numbness. And yes, it will cost you. Because when you feel deeply, you suffer silently. You pick up burdens that were never yours. You grieve over injustice no one else notices. You ache for revival in places that others ignore. And sometimes, you isolate. Not because you hate people, but because the noise of the world gets too loud for your discernment to breathe. I used to think I was alone in this. But now I know. I was just early. Chosen ones often walk through the fog before anyone else even realizes there's a fire. But you cannot mute it just to fit in. You cannot numb it just to be liked. You cannot hide it just to feel normal.
What they call too much, I call prepared. What they dismiss as overreacting, I call prophetic sensitivity.
And when Jesus showed me that, I stopped apologizing. I stopped shrinking. I stopped second-guessing the gut feelings, the sudden tears, the heaviness in prayer. I started leaning into it, because the gift doesn't go away when you ignore it. It just becomes quiet, until the day you need it most. And trust me, you'll need it. There will be a moment when everyone else is celebrating. But your spirit says, "Be still." A moment when everyone says, "Move forward." But heaven says, "Wait." And that moment, that's when your sensitivity becomes your sword. So to every heart that's felt too much, to every soul that's wept alone, to every spirit that absorbs atmospheres and aches for healing, you are not too much. You are tuned. Tuned for heaven. Tuned for warfare. Tuned to walk into rooms and change them not with volume, but with presence.
Your tears are signals. Your silence is sacred. And your sensitivity is a strategy from heaven.
So don't shut it down. Don't numb what makes you dangerous to darkness. Don't dismiss what connects you to my heart. In the next part of this story, I'll tell you about the final battle, the one that didn't just come for my strength, but came for my will to keep living. Because once the enemy sees he can't distract you, he'll try to destroy your desire. But what he didn't know was who had already claimed my life. They never told us that calling comes with a cost. No one said that being chosen sometimes feels like being cursed. They celebrated the anointing, the testimonies, the fire in our voices. But no one warned us that after the altar comes the isolation. After the laying on of hands comes the loneliness. After the vision comes the warfare. I didn't realize it until I was already in it, not in public, but in private, not in front of a crowd, but in the silence of my soul. It didn't look like a battlefield. There were no swords, no shields, no visible blood, but I was bleeding, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And no one saw it, because that's the nature of invisible warfare. It doesn't bruise your skin. It bruises your belief. It doesn't leave scars on your body. It leaves silence in your spirit. You get up one day, and suddenly the prayers don't flow. The worship feels dry. The word feels distant. You still go to church, still smile, still say God is good, but inside, you're hollow, and you begin to ask questions no one talks about, like, God, where are you? Why am I fighting alone? Why does obedience feel like punishment? I was told that following Jesus would bring peace, and it did, but not the kind I imagined. Not peace from battles, peace in battles, and only those who are called truly understand what that means. Because here's what I've learned. The enemy doesn't fight people who pose no threat. He doesn't waste his weapons on the comfortable. He goes after the chosen, the ones carrying assignments that stretch beyond this generation, the ones who carry mantles, not microphones, the ones who stand in the gap, not for applause, but for obedience, and those they bleed in silence, just like I did. There were days I wanted to disappear, not out of drama, not for attention, but because everything felt too heavy, too dark, too endless. And the scariest part, no one would have known. Because when you're the strong one, your collapse looks like rest. Your isolation looks like introversion. Your silence looks like stability. But inside you're screaming, and all the enemy needs is for you to stay silent long enough that the scream turns into surrender. He doesn't need to kill you. He just needs you to walk away, to stop trying, to let go of your post in the spirit. Because when a chosen one leaves their position, there's a ripple. Legacies are affected, families shift, regions feel it. And I was right there on the edge. One more sleepless night, one more unanswered prayer, one more "where are you?" Got away from walking, away from everything. But in that moment, that very moment of collapse, something flickered. It wasn't loud, it wasn't holy, it wasn't even strong. But it was there, a whisper, a breath, a pulse inside my spirit that said,
Not yet, Il, you're not done. This isn't how your story ends.
I sat up slowly, shakily, weakly. But I sat up, and I realized something that I believe someone watching this needs to hear. The greatest threat to the kingdom of darkness is a chosen one who rises after nearly giving up. Because those who've touched the bottom, those who've stared into the abyss, those who've walked through fire and stayed silent while hell mocked them. When they rise, they don't come back the same. They come back dangerous, refined, clear-eyed, heaven-backed, hell-resistant. That's the price. That's the war. And yes, it's hidden. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, it will cost you everything, but it will birth something hell could never stop a witness. Not the kind who preaches with perfect theology, but the kind who's bled in silence, who's wept without words, who's wrestled with angels and walked away with a limp and a deeper understanding of mercy.
You have fought invisible wars. You have survived nights others couldn't. You carry scars that heaven calls trophies.
So if you feel like you've been under siege, if you've been wondering why it hurts more since you said yes to God, if your obedience seems to have triggered hell itself, you're not crazy. You're called, and your calling isn't just about what you do for God. It's about who you become through Him. You don't just carry assignments. You become the evidence that God still resurrects dead things like faith, hope, purpose, even people. And in the next part of this story, I'll tell you what happened the moment I almost gave up completely, and why at the last possible second something sacred broke through. Because the enemy's worst nightmare isn't your failure. It's your comeback, and it's closer than you think. I didn't rise with fireworks. I didn't wake up with angel choirs or a sudden surge of strength. There was no epic soundtrack playing in the background. Just breath, just a slow, trembling breath, and that breath, it was sacred, because it meant I was still here, still alive, still chosen, even after everything. Even after the silence, the collapse, the whisper of death. I was still here. And that was enough. I didn't need to roar back into life. I just needed to sit up, to swing my feet to the floor, to let the air enter my lungs again, and say, Jesus, thank you. My muscles still ached. My chest was still tight. The weight wasn't gone, but it was lighter, because now I knew something I didn't know before.
Pain doesn't mean I'm disqualified. Weakness doesn't mean I'm dismissed. And even if I stand in pieces, I still stand in power.
I looked around that same little room, same bed, same cracks on the wall, same stained curtain, but I was no longer the same man. I had wrestled with darkness. I had stared into the abyss. And I didn't just survive it. I was transformed by it. I didn't come out with perfect theology. I didn't come out with every answer, but I came out with something the enemy couldn't steal: testimony. A testimony that says, even when I wanted to die, God stayed. A testimony that says, even when I had nothing left, He never left me. And maybe that's all you need right now. Not a miracle, not a breakthrough, just enough breath to whisper, God, I'm still here. Because that whisper, it moves heaven. That sigh, it silences hell. And that willingness, it activates your next chapter. I don't know what you've walked through. I don't know what demons you fought in silence. But I do know this. If you're still breathing, still watching, still holding on even by a thread, that thread is enough.
You don't have to rise with strength. You just have to rise with willingness, because I, the Lord, will be your strength.
I rose, not because I was ready, but because I was called. Not because I felt holy, but because I was still His. Not because the weight was gone, but because the weight no longer had the final word. I stood up slowly, with tears, still fresh, voice still shaking. But I stood, and the moment my feet touched the floor, I felt it. A shift. Not in the room, in the spirit. Something had moved, something had changed. Because when a chosen one rises, even in pain, even in pieces, all of hell takes notice, and all of heaven takes record. So if you're watching this now, and you don't feel worthy, and you don't feel strong, and you don't feel ready, stand anyway. Even if your hands tremble, even if your voice cracks, even if your legs feel weak, because you're not rising alone.
I am rising with you, says the Lord, and the ground will remember that a warrior just stood up.
I rose, not because I was ready, but because I was called. Not because I felt holy, but because I was still His. Not because the weight was gone, but because the weight no longer had the final word. I stood up slowly, with tears, still fresh, voice still shaking. But I stood, and the moment my feet touched the floor, I felt it. A shift, not in the room, in the spirit. Something had moved, something had changed. Because when a chosen one rises, even in pain, even in pieces, all of hell takes notice, and all of heaven takes record. So if you're watching this now, and you don't feel worthy, and you don't feel strong, and you don't feel ready, stand anyway. Even if your hands tremble, even if your voice cracks, even if your legs feel weak, because you're not rising alone.